Hello and welcome to Women of the Middle East podcast.
Women of the Middle East.
This podcast relates the realities of Arab women and their rich and diverse experiences. It aims to present the multiplicity of their voices and wishes to break overdue cultural stereotypes about women of the Middle East. My name is Naza Alakija. I'm a feminist, scholar, and educator.
This is Women of the Middle East podcast.
This is Season 4, Women Voices Across Genres, where I will be speaking to women producing feminist content across different genres and outlets. These courageous voices delve into untapped areas such as women with disability, hybrid identities, intergenerational trauma, feminist narrative and activism, and much, much more. I'm your host, Naza Alakija, contributing to creating a new narrative about us by us.
This is Women of the Middle East podcast.
Hello and welcome. Our guest here is in Doha and in our studios today, Naza Alakija. Born in Tehran, Iran, and raised in the UK. Naza is a humanitarian, a philanthropist, and global education advocate, focusing on education, empowerment of women and girls, and the environment. This is only a snippet of her bio, very long bio. Naza, we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're a 3D, well-rounded activist. Mm-hmm. You're an environmentalist, human rights activist, and a philanthropist. You also advise the UNICEF on creating campaigns, but you also have founded your own initiative, SAGE, the Social Accelerator for a Green Economy. How can you encapsulate all of this, and not just your own story, but in your young narrative of who you are as a Middle Eastern young woman? How did it all start, and where is it heading to? What made you who you are? What's your story in your own words?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I moved to the UK when I was 9 years old, and we were immigrants. We left Iran, and the greatest things that shaped me were the resources that I had access to. So the very basic resources, and the most important one of those for me was education. I think growing up, my family really instilled the value of education and really encouraged me to pursue it. And that almost, for me, being in a position now where I'm able to help, where I'm able to do the same for others, I see it as you really have to look at this objectively from what, if you have the ability to do something like this, why wouldn't you? And also, I know what it did for me. I know how important it was for me. I know how important it was to shape my narrative. So I really want to be able to do the same things for others, especially young girls in my position.
How grounded are you in your Middle Eastern identity? And you've moved to the UK at the age of 9. Again, talking about creating our own narratives. You are creating a narrative that includes bettering the lives, right, of other women, men, youth in the region. How grounded do you think you are in that identity, and what did you manage to take from that identity, and what did you manage to, say, well, this doesn't work for me?
Well, growing up in a foreign country where English is your second language, it's very, very difficult to live authentically and not be influenced. You almost grow up in a duality. And it's only as you start to get older and become more confident and develop a better sense of agency that you really start to develop and understand how important your culture and heritage is to you. I didn't understand this until probably my late 20s. Growing up in a very Eurocentric society, it's hard to be who you actually are. I wasn't given many opportunities, and you almost have to always fight and prove yourself a little bit more. First of all, because you're a woman. Second of all, because you're a Middle Eastern woman. And most of these societies generally have a misconception about you, about what you represent, and what your ideological values are. And yeah, it's hard. It's very, I won't lie to you and say I was always able to do that. It's difficult, but I think when you do start to own it and own your story, own your culture, or own your background, it really does empower you so much more. So today, I couldn't be prouder to be an Iranian woman. I couldn't be prouder to, I couldn't be prouder to be a Middle Eastern woman, because I see, especially today, so many Middle Eastern women coming out and being powerful figures in the world and changing the narratives about who we actually are. So, at the moment, it's still developing. I'm still, I'm becoming more and more in tune with my culture. And given that Iran is a unique case, because there's, it is such a diverse country. There's so many different cultures, background, heritages that exist within the country. So again, it's still becoming clear to me, and it's still defining. But I am very proud to be a Middle Eastern woman.
And I think you do have the advantage, or you did have the advantage, growing up, of looking at identity and identity dynamics from a wider perspective. I don't think it's a disadvantage. Now you would see, and this is why I named the podcast Women of the Middle East, not in the Middle East, because there are many Middle Eastern women living in the West, and being exposed to the distorted images and ideologies about, and Orientalists, reductionists ideology about Middle Eastern women, Arab women, Muslim women, that unfortunately some have internalized. Some of us have internalized even in the Middle East through media, Hollywood and such. But you were able to look at it from an educational perspective, learn about the world, learn about Middle Eastern identity, and manage to escape the indoctrination that some Middle Eastern women have gone through, right? That made them believe in their lack of agency, and their passivity, and their lack of power. What would you say about that?
I think you're 100% right. And I think today, it's whether we like it or for good or for bad, social media has actually played a huge part in this. Because what it's done is that it's essentially shown women in all over the world that there are people like you out there. So own who you are, live authentically, and be the creator of your own story. You don't have to conform. I mean, there is the dark side of social media as well, and but I think more importantly, depending on how you see things and what your education has been, you can either use it as a tool that empowers you, or you can, as you say, indoctrinate yourself to what everybody else believes you should be.
No, true. Let's talk about SAGE. So during upheavals of any sort, of course, whether political unrest or wars or displacement, and recently a health pandemic, girls and women are the first to suffer, and the long-term impacts on them is also disproportionately bigger. What are the gender-sensitive measures you've taken in SAGE to ensure that help and support is extended to this disadvantaged, huge portion of our population in the Middle East? What's the work that you've done?
I want to tell you a story. So when I first started SAGE Foundation, one of the things that I focused on was climate, because you see how much of social development is starting to unravel. And I remember being at a school, and we had a program at the time where we were speaking to kids about climate education, recycling, things like that. And I remember going into this particular classroom, and there was a young girl there, and she was, I could feel her looking at me from the periphery from my periphery. And as soon as I finished speaking, she was the first person to put her hand up. And she said to me, with all due respect, she says, I know what you're telling me, but my struggle is that I'm trying to get home without getting raped. And that was, for me, I started to realize, and I apologized to her first, and I said, look, I'm here to share, but I'm also here to learn. So teach me so I can understand your context a little bit better. And the one thing I started to realize as I did more and more work on the ground was that women and girls has to be at the intersection of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's public health, whether it's climate, whether it's whatever it is. You always have to prioritize women and girls. COVID was probably it regressed gender equality so much. There was actually a report that was released by the World Economic Forum a year after the pandemic, and it showed that we regressed 17 years in gender equality. 17 years. That's that has such an impact on society. And going forward, thinking about social development, you have to include women and girls. For a healthy, stable society, things don't function without it. And the other thing that I think is really important at these intersections is education. Everything always goes back to education, and it must be contextual. It's not something that, the same values do not apply all over the world. The same concepts are not applicable all over the world. And I think it's really, really important to go in with that mindset and understanding that these solutions essentially come from grassroots. We can be the people that frame these structural frameworks on the ground, but essentially it's a dialogue between people on the ground and the organization. So whenever we do any work, whenever we work with a grassroots organization, the first thing we always ask them is, what work do you do in this area, in this field of work with women and girls? So that's how we really came to it. I think that's what you were alluding to, right?
That's amazing. You've done some work on child marriages too, right, in Yemen? Can you tell me more about that?
So child marriages, yeah. I mean, look, I was in Afghanistan with UNICEF in March 2020, and we were in a refugee camp in Herat. Herat is right at the border of Iran and Afghanistan. And I went back 6 months later, and the number of child brides, it was visibly worse. And the problem was that international organization had not been able to collect enough data by that point. So from March to October, that was an ample time. It was, but it wasn't. There was not enough data around this. But as an individual, when you get online, you see this. And so I started to look into child marriage, and Yemen was one of the countries that's first struck by this. And you look at the root causes of child marriage. Almost always, nobody wants to wed their children off at a young age. It is almost always out of sheer desperation. And when I spoke to some of the mothers in these refugee camps, they were so ashamed that they didn't want to even speak to me about it. But the women that did share, she said to me, one of them I remember said to me distinctly, she said, look, imagine not eating for 2 weeks and having to feed 6 other children. On top of that, security means very different things to me and you, and for people that live within these refugee camps. Very often, the parents believe that these children are safer with a man. So there's a number of factors that play into this, but it's very easy for us to look at it and shame it and look at it as something very, very negative, but almost always it's out of sheer desperation. Personally, I don't know about you, if I don't eat for half a day or even a day, I start to, I can't think logically. I can't think, So imagine that happening for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, and really not being able to feed your family. So most of the time it is out of desperation that they are wedding their daughters off for a dowry and for security. Yemen is one of those places that poverty is so rife given the conflict that's been happening there over the years, given climate change that's affecting food security. It's very complex, but essentially these are the things that feed into the issue of child marriage becoming so prevalent in places like Yemen.
When I ask you about your story and how can you say it in your own words, and this is what I sensed from your story just by reading about you. Where do you get this courage and conviction from? We all fight, some of us for women and for girls, some of us from the luxury of their homes, from the luxury of our homes, right? But some are on the ground meeting those people, hearing those stories that really break your heart. Where do you get the strength from, Naza? Tell me, how do you manage to take care of yourself while going through those other people's ordeals?
Look, my childhood wasn't the easiest childhood. I'll be very honest. I have an amazing mother who really fought against, all odds to give us the best life she possibly could. And she's a warrior. She really is. And she inspired me so much because I saw the things that she went through growing up, and they instilled these values in me. And for me to get on ground, you have to, if you want to do this kind of work, you have to be on the ground. You don't really have a choice. Don't get me wrong. I love traveling. I love, meeting people. I love learning from them. But, sometimes it does wear me down. But ultimately, if I want to do what I'm doing effectively, I have to be on the ground. And I have to understand it from people's perspective, not something, it's very easy for me to sit there as, well, the world needs education. So let's give education to, no, but what kind of education? It has to be, and so much of colonial legacies reside in aid and philanthropy, right? The ideology that this is the kind of education that people, no, not necessarily. Education is contextual. However, there are some things that, there's some tools that there are common similarities, but again, it's very, very contextual. How do I take care of myself? I do burn out now and again, but I do prioritize my health as well. I try to eat well, I try to exercise, I try to rest well, and I also try to spend time with friends, spend time with family, and and have that downtime. But yeah, it's normal. I mean, I'm sure you have it as well. It's when you love something so much, and it transcends the concept of work, you do tend to burn out a little bit, and it is normal.
But it becomes a huge responsibility too, because you get to meet those women, and as you said, each woman has a story of her own, and this is the beauty of all of the efforts we do to bring those stories into life. I don't know how much, again, I'm generalizing by saying West, because it's never West and East, but we see it nowadays with the World Cup and the attacks on Qatar, how unified the attacks are, how, so it's white supremacy, it's colonial mentality, and this is exactly what happens when they deal with Middle Eastern women. No, you break this down and you tell them each woman has a story. And now woman in Yemen has a collective story. And yes, poverty plays a role in it. Yes, their fear, the insecurity, their fear for their girls. And we saw it in Iraq too, when they took the girls out of school. But families who believed in education took their girls out of school because girls were raped on the way to the school. So it's out of fear for the girls. Yes, some of them cover them up because they know what's going to happen when a girl looks, feminine on the street by all of this militia. So they need to hear those stories. What do you do to relate those stories? How do you tell those stories to the world?
Look, I think it's really important for people to be able to own their own narrative and tell their own story. People's stories are not the West's to tell. Middle Eastern stories are nobody else belong to nobody else but to Middle Eastern people. We must be able to share our own our own narratives. I think, again, it goes back to, and I think as women, we are so powerful in this, in being able to empathize, in being able to understand, in being able to, seeing where one another come from, and I think Qatar has been, at the forefront of a very aggressive campaign against them. There's no doubt that there's issues in Qatar, and I think everybody has acknowledged that. They want to be put on the world map. They want the world to come and see their culture.
Exactly.
And please, if I'm speaking out of terms, I'm not a Qatari woman, but if I'm speaking out of terms, please stop me. But this is the impression that I've gotten.
Yes, true.
And instead of saying, okay, let's sit down with one another. Let's understand where we come from. Let's understand our where things stem from, and the sensitivities, political sensitivities, social sensitivities. I'm actually quite stunned at how this is turning. I never expected it to be, that everybody deserves to be objectively criticized, but never to this extent. So I think the most important thing right now, and again, this is not my place to say, this is the place of a Qatari woman to come out and say, but to be able to tell your story of who you are, how you operate within this society, what challenges do you see, and really, challenging the status quo within your own community. It is not the job of the West to do this for Qatar. So, some of my closest friends live in this country. One of our mutual friends, Donna, for example, they're remarkable women, and I know they face certain challenges. I know they face certain barriers, but they are high flyers. They are achieving things that a lot of people don't achieve in a lifetime. So I think being able to now share these stories and putting women like yourself on the world stage and say, this is who we are, this is what we do, is key for Qatar, and to be able to really tell their story and share that with the world
and break that historical narrative of needing the West to save us. No, we don't need them to save us. If we have our own issues, believe me, we're calling it out and we're talking about it, and we will be fixing it on our own. You've done work on finding digital solutions for women and girls, and I think maybe this had stemmed from COVID and being disconnected, especially during the pandemic. The gender digital gap was brought to the surface, reflecting yet another harsh reality for Middle Eastern women. Women and girls were deprived from continuing their online education, had no access to information, no access even to security. So those who were confined in houses that, with their aggressors, for example, with lack of security, whether in their houses or in their communities. What's the work that you've done in terms of digital access for women and girls?
So I actually work with UNICEF on this project. It's a project called Giga, and what Giga is aiming to do is to connect every single school to the world, to the internet, in the world, to the internet by 2030. And I'll be perfectly honest, at first when I started looking at this project, I didn't really understand the importance of it. And then COVID happened. And you saw how that digital divide affected people who didn't have access to the internet. And not just in terms of education, but in terms of employment as well, right? If you do not have access to as a student, and you're in a developing nation where your family is really trying to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis, and they're stretching themselves and they're sending you to school. When your school shuts down for a period of time, the parents are often reluctant to send their kids back to school, especially girls. So what they tend to do is child marriage, it results in child marriage, or they send them into employment from a young age. Now, keeping those girls out of education, as we've discussed, creates a very unhealthy and unbalanced society. And on top of that, the mothers, let's just use the mothers as an example, they're not able to, what COVID did, what a lockdown means for me and you is very different to what a lockdown means to women in Yemen or women in Afghanistan that are living in refugee camps, that are working on a day-to-day basis just to eat, not to save money, not to pay for bills, just to eat. That was, it created such an unequal world, which is what we're seeing today. I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly feel like the world's on fire right now. I feel like we're at such a, digital connectivity is now a human right. It's no longer as important as having water, because it gives employment opportunities and access to education that wouldn't conventionally be there. On top of that, it is also important to make sure that women and girls have access to accelerators and incubators that gives them opportunities into the workplace and into the market after their education. So it's, digital connectivity plus these programs that transitions women into the workplace are as important as water. They're as essential as water.
So let's talk about Iran. Protests have been rocking Iran since September, following the killing, of course, of the 22-year-old Kurdish woman Zaina Mahsan Amini by the police forces for wearing her hijab inappropriately. It's for sure not the first protest against the regime that controls women in the name of religion, but because of the attention that this has been gaining worldwide, some called it the biggest women's rights movement in the world. Some say it's a revolution in the making. What's your take on this?
Look, what's happening in Iran is, it shows you the power of women. For a very, very long time, what the government in Iran has done has turned men against women. They have forced or subjugated women to laws that naturally makes them unequal in society, which naturally makes it a systemic issue. And this is the first female-led revolution that is supported by men. And it is the first time, as you rightly said, there has been times where there have been protests in the past, but this is the first time that protesters are coming to the streets and they are they're demanding the downfall of the theocracy. The Islamic Republic has failed not just women but also men, and today we see that on social media, we see that in the news, and we see this. You see it for yourself. Being subjugated to laws means that you are not able to live your authentic. You're not allowed to be your authentic self. You're not allowed to embody your identity. It is not about religion. In Iran, we have different religions, different backgrounds, and when you're not able to embody that, when you are forced to be something that you are not, this is the outcome.
Yeah.
So women are fighting not just because it's not about the hijab. It's not about religion. It's about being able to make your own choices. It's about being able to be who you are. And I've never been as proud as I am today to be an Iranian woman. I really, and I don't know where they get this bravery. They are truly a remarkable generation because they are fearless, and they are they're going into the streets and they're chanting, "Tell my mother she no longer has a daughter," because what that's essentially saying is that I could die, but I'm willing to die for my freedom.
Yeah.
I'm willing to die to be able to make choices about myself. So it's a remarkable time for us as Iranians, and I really I stand in solidarity with my Iranian brothers and sisters. I stand in solidarity with my compatriots. And I really wish a better future for Iran, because Iranian women deserve that. And a change in regime in Iran is going to mean significant changes geopolitically within the Middle East. So I really, I stand proud. I stand in solidarity, and I'm behind them as 100%. And I will continue to amplify their voices and share their stories, because they truly deserve that. That bravery deserves it.
They do, and we're all here also join you to in support of Iranian men and women who are asking for, as you said, a chance to form their own identities. This is a generation that was stripped away from its agency, from its freedom, from its right to form their own identity. And it's all about identity politics. It's not about religion. It's the use of religion to oppress this generation. And whether it's a revolution or, yes, it is a women's movement, definitely, but it's a women's movement that is turning into a human rights movement. Mm-hmm. It's a human rights movement.
Absolutely.
Full stop. Unlike what we've seen with the Arab Spring, mm-hmm. the Arab Revolution, where it turned out as, a collective movement, and then women were stripped out of those movements. Mm-hmm. Okay, the moment women spoke about their rights, they said, "Oh, it's not time for you." Mm-hmm. But this started with rights of the human, and the woman is at the heart and
yes.
the core of that movement.
Essentially, women are at the intersection of human rights.
Exactly.
As we said before, it's if you don't take women and gender equality into consideration, you have a very flawed and skewed ideology about what human rights means.
True. And I love the acts of defiance that came out of this movement. So we know that the hair cutting, mm-hmm. The men and women supporting, especially women from East and West, supporting Iranian women by cutting their hair online. But also I read yesterday that sanitary pads were used to block CCTV cameras in the metro stations and trains in Iran, as also an act of defiance against the surveillance of women. So you want to see us and see how we act? I'm like, look at this.
Isn't it amazing?
That's powerful, to say the truth. What can feminists and feminist groups and organizations in the MENA do to help Iranian women at this stage? What can we all do to help them?
I mean, I think the most important one and the most obvious one is continue to amplify their voices. Continue to stand in solidarity, because they are dying every single day. And there's different numbers and a lot of things coming out from the ground, and there's this many people that I don't know what the numbers are, but even that one person is one too many. Even that one child is one too many. So continue to share our stories, continue to cover. And I'm disappointed in mainstream media, because they have really failed. I mean, more so now they're starting to pick it up and talk about it a little bit more, but they have really failed in being able to amplify this. And I don't know if it's because they're not able to verify facts, or I don't know. I don't believe that there's a conspiracy. I'm open to hearing this from journalists. They can tell us, why aren't you covering our we're actively reaching out to people and saying, hey, we're here, share our stories. That's the first thing. Supporting organizations like Amnesty International. They have set up a petition, which I think is closed now actually, but they have set up a petition to hold, for the UN to create a mechanism that will hold the government in Iran accountable for what they're doing. They are acting with impunity. They really are. They are killing people on the streets without in the name of what? And they have really disgraced religion. They have disgraced Islam, and to what extent? So they must be held accountable. So if you come across organizations that are holding people, that are creating mechanisms to hold the government accountable, please support them. And these are the two major things I would say for right now. I mean, it's continuing to develop. We're continuing to, see what happens on the ground. But I think amplification right now is the most important thing for us.
Some slogans emerged from this movement. Can you teach us one?
The one I think everybody has heard is Woman, Life, Freedom,
Yes.
which actually originated from the Kurdish women fighting Daesh in Syria. That's where it actually originated from, Jinjian Azadi. And it's such a symbolic slogan. And there's another one that I don't know if you've seen some of the videos. The women are saying "Zan Azad Mana," I am the free woman, and the men are chanting, "You're the pervert, you're the discipline." So I mean, really, as I said, they're fearless. But these are the two that I would probably. And I'll share some videos with you so you can see these. Yeah.
Okay, can you repeat them? So, Woman, Life, Freedom.
I am a free woman.
In Farsi.
In Farsi, is Zan Azad Mana. So I'm a free woman. You are the pervert. You're the discipline.
Lots of work needs to be done. As you said, contextualized education for men and women. And it really needs to start really early in our lives for men to understand that without women there is no life, and for women to understand that they need women as their best allies.
Yeah, and I think as feminists, one thing I would say is our job is to raise our children like that, girls and boys, teaching them, strong values about, what the importance of a woman, the importance of what a woman symbolizes in your life, how to treat women, how to perceive women, not as half of an individual, but as an individual equal to you. So I think that you're raising your children as well as feminists is extremely important.
Exactly. So thank you so much. It's a lovely conversation that we had today, and painful, but real, and hopeful, because there are women like you, young women like you, doing the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening and watching. To stay up to date with Women of the Middle East podcast, you can subscribe and don't forget to rate us. If you would like to contact me directly, you can do so on Instagram or Twitter or via email.